All right, today we're tackling a really big topic, one that gets to the heart of public trust, police accountability. It's a tough one, for sure. We're going to break down the systems in place, from the inside out, to really get a handle on how they're supposed to work and maybe where they don't.
So let's just dive right in with this central question, right? When an officer is accused of doing something wrong, who's the one that actually steps in? Who investigates and makes sure justice is served? I mean, really, who polices the police?
Okay, but before we can even get into all the systems of accountability, we've got to be on the same page. We have to be really clear about what we're talking about when we say police misconduct. What does that term actually cover?
So in the broadest sense, police misconduct is really any action an officer takes that's either illegal or just flat out against department policy. This could be something like, falsifying a report, or it could be much more serious, like actual criminal behavior. And this is where we get a really important distinction. There's misconduct, and then there's police abuse. Abuse is a specific kind of misconduct. It's all about an officer misusing their power. We're talking things like excessive force or intimidation. So think of it this way. All abuse is misconduct, but not all misconduct is necessarily abuse. That's a key difference.
So where does this whole accountability thing even begin? Well, you might be surprised. The very first line of defense, it's not some formal investigation. Nope, it happens right there, in the moment, on the street, between the officers themselves.
This whole idea is called active bystandership. And what it really means is that every single officer has a duty to not just, do the right thing themselves, but to actually step in and stop a fellow officer if they see them crossing a line. It's about shared responsibility.
And this isn't just one simple decision. It's a whole process, a chain of events. An officer has to first notice what's happening, then interpret it as a problem, feel responsible enough to do something, figure out how to intervene, and then, and this is the big one, actually take action. And all of that, it has to happen in a split second. That's a lot of pressure.
Okay, so what happens if that on-the-spot intervention doesn't happen? Or if it's just not enough to solve the problem? Well, that's when things move up the chain. It goes from the street to a much more formal internal system.
And this is where internal affairs, or IA, comes in. This is a division inside the police department made up of police officers whose entire job is to investigate other officers. The best way to think about it, it's literally the department grading its own homework. Now, they've got the insider knowledge for sure, but you can see how that setup immediately makes people ask questions about bias, right?
Now, for an IA division to have any credibility, it's supposed to follow some really strict guidelines. We're talking thorough and impartial investigations. Cases need to be resolved in a timely manner. The officer's rights have to be respected. Disciplinary actions need to be consistent across the board, and the whole process should be transparent. This whole framework is designed to be fair to everyone involved, both the public and the officer under investigation.
But what if the public just doesn't trust the police to investigate themselves? I mean, that's a real concern for a lot of people. And that's exactly where an external system comes into play, bringing in voices from outside the department to look at what's going on.
This is what we call civilian oversight. These are independent boards, and they're made up of regular community members, not police officers. Their job is to investigate complaints or, in some cases, review the work that internal affairs has already done. So if IA is the department grading its own homework, then civilian oversight, well, that's kind of like the parent-teacher conference where someone else comes in to check the results.
Now, this approach has some pretty clear upsides and some definite downsides. On the one hand, it can really boost public trust and transparency by having that independent perspective. But on the other hand, these boards can sometimes lack that deep, hands-on law enforcement expertise. And you can get a situation where it creates a real us versus them feeling between the community board and the police department.
Okay, so let's take a step back. We've got three different layers here, right? We've got the individual officer on the street, the internal system with IA, and the external system with civilian oversight. So now, let's try to put all these pieces together and see how they're supposed to fit in this big search for real accountability. And this really brings us to the fundamental tension in this whole debate. When it comes down to it, which system holds the key? Which one do we trust more to get to the truth? Is it the internal investigation with all its expertise, or is it the external oversight with its independent perspective?
So here's the trade-off in a nutshell. Internal affairs has the deep, in-depth police knowledge and can act decisively, but it always struggles with that perception of bias and a lack of public trust. Then you have civilian oversight, which has the public's confidence and is independent, but it might lack that specialized expertise and can sometimes create a hostile relationship. It's pretty clear that neither system, on its own, is a perfect silver bullet.
And that brings us to our final big question.
Maybe it's not about choosing one system over the other. Maybe it's about finding a way to blend them, a hybrid model where they can check and balance each other out. So we'll leave you with this thought to chew on. What does true accountability in policing actually look like to you? And how can we build a system where every single layer, from that individual officer to the internal affairs unit to the community board, is working together to get us there? That really is the question we all need to answer.